Welcome back. This is This Day Live on Arise TV channel. I'm Reuben Abati in Nigeria's commercial capital, Lagos. Now, I said before we went on break that we're going to take a look at Kenya. There are very interesting developments in Kenya. The election that was held on August 8 has been annulled by the Supreme Court, with the Supreme Court citing irregularities affecting the credibility of the election. After the main contender, Raila Odinga, went all the way to the Supreme Court. Now, this has changed the template in Kenya. And the biggest fear is that after that second election, that rerun is held, Kenya could again break out in violence, ethnic violence. In 2008, over 1,000 persons died in Kenya. Are we likely to see that possibility this time around, particularly given the rhetoric of the politicians and the reactions of the two main challengers, Raila Odinga and the incumbent president, Uhuru Kenyatta? Well, I'll come back to you, Yemi, because you've been involved in political advocacy, citizen advocacy, election monitoring. What are your worst fears for Kenya?
I think the biggest thing is ensuring that Kenyans feel that the process is free and fair. So Uhuru repeatedly said he didn't agree with the Supreme Court's ruling, but he would respect it. Then later on went to basically say he's going to deal with the judges after the elections.
You even call them crooks.
Exactly.
Crooks.
So it doesn't quite bode very well for his own sense of rule of law. I think Raila definitely glad that he decided to go to court, because initially he said he didn't trust the system, so he wasn't going to go to court. So he did go to court. So the fact that after the results were announced, we didn't have a 2007 repeat is a good thing. And my own belief is that if they're able to show that the commission puts the right processes in place to ensure that people feel that the process is free, fair, credible, all the issues either party might have had with the process is sorted out, and whatever results then comes out, I don't think we're going to have a repeat of 2007.
Well,
that's my sense.
Wale.
You know, when the Supreme Court handed that ruling, I felt a sense of relief. Because if you recall, when we discussed Kenya the other week, I said I was not comfortable with the outcome of the election, especially the violence that broke out. So when the annulment was handed down, I was quite glad. And then, of course, I also celebrated the timing. It was effectively done, you know, from the time the election was held, the time it went to court, and it was delivered. No waste of time, it was just, straight on. But
I mean, maybe a point about that, because I've heard some Nigerians say, oh, look at the Kenyans. They sorted this thing out within a matter of weeks. Yeah. If it were Nigeria, this thing will go on endlessly. And I think there's a lesson to be learned from there. Absolutely. After the experience of the Kenyans in 2007, 2008, there was a constitutional review.
Exactly. So it's constitutional.
Yes, absolutely. And Section 140 of the new Kenyan constitution expressly states that if there's any dispute over presidential election, it should be resolved within 4 weeks. But this particular Supreme Court, resolved the matter in 2 weeks. And you think there's a lesson there truly for Nigeria?
Absolutely. I was excited.
Nigeria will have done half your 4 years before they now tell you, oops, sorry, you shouldn't have won.
And then I also do not think that the Supreme Court judgment it's a lesson only for Africans alone. I think the world in general, because we almost had the election of U.S. discredited in 2000 following the disputed recount in Florida, But, I mean, we set the pace this time, and I think it's commendable, largely commendable.
In addition, I think it's also a clear indication of effectiveness or separation of powers and a win for democracy as well. Because that gives confidence to say that truly the legislative is independent of the executive.
But don't also forget that this is the first time this kind of thing will happen in Africa. That an incumbent president who has been congratulated will then be told that the election has been annulled. Absolutely. Do you ever see that happening in some other African countries?
Peacefully as well.
Where?
As I said,
Peacefully, yeah.
as well. Not just Gambians. Everybody's okay.
But I think we also set an example in 2015, an incumbent lost.
Yes.
You know, the INEC conducted an election that pushed out an incumbent, and there was no crisis. That's commendable.
Concession and everybody.
Yeah, but with Odinga even also saying that certain conditions have to be met.
I told you.
And that the Supreme Court the ruling cannot take effect except those conditions have been met.
Exactly.
We will have assumed that Odinga will say,
We'll be the
well,
one celebrating and commending.
this is another opportunity. Let's go to the field and let's fight it out. And you know, in Kenya, the sensitivities are really very strong, ethnically. And that's why I say, you know, don't you fear that after the election goes one way or the other, we could have a blowout in Kenya, reversing the gains.
It's not impossible, but we just pray, hope and pray.
The Commission has a huge responsibility, I think, in ensuring that all the concerns raised in terms of process, because at the end of the day, it wasn't a judgment around numbers of votes. It was a judgment around process.
Yes.
That the process did not meet what the Constitution stipulated. Therefore, we cannot say we had a free and fair election. So if then the onus is now on the Commission to ensure that they followed the Constitution to the letter, to ensure that, okay, everything we're supposed to do, check, we've done it.
And I think...
But again, there have been comments about the process itself. International observers form an important part of the electoral process. And all the international observers that took part in that Kenya election, all judged the elections to have been free and fair. You know, so what happened?
Remember,
is it that they didn't see the irregularities?
Remember, I raised it on this platform.
The
fact that the observer said it was free doesn't mean it was free.
Exactly.
But the observer, I think the truth of the matter is, let's not be naive about it. It was not in the interest of the observers to amplify the irregularities. Okay. The general sense was that...
Observers now engage in political correctness?
No, I think... let me rephrase that. I think what they were trying to say was that, yes, they did not do certain things at the time they were supposed to. Those things were amended.
So plus or minus.
Those things were amended. And then ultimately, as they said, the votes did not differ. So in their own mind, it's not that Kenyatta would not have still won. But the Supreme Court is saying, no, that's not the issue. It's not an issue of the numbers counted at the end of the day. The issue is there's a process. And once the Constitution has been breached, we cannot say we have a free and fair election.
We'll come back to this subject, but let's take a few seconds and watch the video of the Kenya election.
A declaration is hereby issued that the presidential election held on 8th August 2017 was not conducted in accordance with the Constitution and the applicable law, rendering the declared results invalid, null, and void.
Well, I mean, that was the Supreme Court justice. He's been praised across Africa as a very good example, as a very courageous man. But now that President Kenyatta is threatening to fix the problem with the judiciary, and he's already calling the Supreme Court justices crooks and accusing them of taking the people's mandate away. Now, what if Kenyatta wins at the end of the day?
He's assuming he's going to win.
Well, suppose he wins. What kind of protection would these Supreme Court justices have in Kenya?
They are the lawmakers. So I'm not the lawmakers, but they're the judiciary.
You have not seen countries where the executive arm of government descend on the judges and put them in their place?
Like us.
You have not seen so.
We live in one.
One of the commentaries on the Kenya situation is, look, people say, what's wrong with President Kenyatta? How can people you appointed? You know, how can they remove you from office?
I was going to say, honestly, though, if the sense I get from Kenyans, so Uhuru Kenya, as the incumbent president, has made his own position very clear.
Yes.
But he seems to be in a minority. Most Kenyans seem to have appreciated what the judges did and respect them for it. So even if Uhuru comes back as president, it'll be very interesting to see how he, as president, then decides he wants to punish a judiciary that people feel are representing them or are in the side of the people. So that'll be interesting to see.
I also think as a president, it is, it's beneath him to
threaten the judiciary.
Completely.
He ought to defend the rule of law,
absolutely.
defend the oath of office that he took, and be seen to be providing leadership and acting as a statesman at a critical time.
In the final analysis, that's what makes us Africans.
What's that supposed to mean?
We'll go again for a short break, but when we return, we'll take a more critical look at the economy and the markets. We have Prisca here to deal with that.
Neighbor. Who you always call? Why you always get money to buy a time?
Where the money?
Yes, the money where you dey always carry around.
And they make all those plenty calls. Now my bonus on top 9 mobile. I dey always use o.
Set up there. Not be all of us dey collect bonus for we network.
9 mobile bonus dey different.
Hey, buy 9 mobile SIM, recharge it and get up to 10,000 naira daily on your first recharge for 30 days. Plus other benefit. Hey, existing subscribers, you dial *819# to opt in.
9 Mobile. Here for you. Here for Naija.
Welcome back to the Sunday talk show, This Day Live, here on the Arise News channel. I'm Reuben Abati. Now, in this segment, we'll be looking at the market, the economy, business. And we have a leading business expert whose day job is as a senior executive at AMCON, joining me in this segment to discuss how the economy fared last week. Once again, Prisca, welcome.
Thank you.
Yeah. Now, Prisca, I know earlier on you were part of the discussion of the economic recession and the report by the National Bureau of Statistics stating that we are already out of recession. But what are the other key economic developments in Nigeria that are noteworthy in the past week?
Like we rightly said, the GDP numbers were released during the week. As we can see, there was an expansion in growth by 0.55% in comparison to the contraction in Q1 of about 0.91%. There's been reluctance to celebrate that because it's not as positive as the outlook for our neighboring country, South Africa, where they also came out of recession about the same time as Nigeria did. And they had been in recession for 2 quarters prior to this. Their growth rate was about 2.55%, compared to Nigeria that had been in recession for 5 consecutive quarters. And we managed to come out with an expansion of about 0.55%. So should we be quick to celebrate? I would say we should be cautious about the growth. In as much as it is directionally positive, it is also a tendency that if it's not managed properly, we might go back to the recession in the next month. If the positive, if the indicators that brought about this growth does not continue for the next quarter.
Yeah, well, that point you also made earlier, and it's good that you have further emphasized it. But what's the general outlook for the market and the economy as we round up the 3rd quarter and we prepare for the 4th quarter?
Looking at key sectors, we can see that for agric, we're in the harvest season as we're going into Q3. So the expectations that products prices will come down. for most of the, I mean, we talked about this in the previous sectors as well, that we can already see the impact of that in the prices of food, as yam, a lot of other staple foods have decreased based on the fact that products are more readily available in the market. We also see the FX market has been relatively stable. The stock market too has been stable. There's been a flatlining in oil production. We haven't seen any remarkable increase in oil prices, given the stability in the Niger Delta and also the cessation of violence in the Niger Delta. So there's been no dramatic changes, and we don't expect any to happen, except something out of the ordinary happens in the next 2 quarters. So we still expect the stable growth to continue into the 4th quarter as we hope to boost.
Well, I mean, okay.
There's something else I mentioned in the earlier segment. If you also look at the fact that the estimated growth we expect to get the country out of unemployment in the next few weeks, by Friday, the 15th of next week, we expect the numbers for the unemployment rate to come out. We also expect that by the 25th to the 26th, the information on inflation rate will also have come out. We are projecting it to be at about 15.9%.
Is there anything happening in the international markets that is worthy of note? That could be relevant to our own circumstances in Nigeria?
Well, we've spoken about a major one, which was what happened in Kenya, which is a plus for Africa, given the fact that the Supreme Court ruling was able to impact an incumbent president the way it has.
But how about the hurricane incident in Texas, in Houston, considering that, that area is very strategic within the oil market?
Well, the beauty about the flooding is the fact that the environmentalists had predicted a high level of pollution. At least the pollution did not come from any of the dump sites. Pollution mostly was from the environment itself, where gasoline cars that were absorbed in the water, fuel leaking, or relative waste within the community. So I don't see any major crisis coming out as a result of that pollution, because we know that Houston is an oil-producing state. So if that was not well managed, it would have caused a lot of environmental problems. But another thing we need to look out for again is the fact that in the last week, the VP of the Reserve Bank, Stanley Fischer, resigned. And the president is anti-regulation. However, the chairman of the Reserve Bank is pro-regulation. So we are hoping that whoever he appoints to take over the place of Fischer will be somebody who would not be in conflict with the current chairman of the Reserve Bank. So that way we would expect that there would be stability in the
U.S. Reserve Bank.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Well, Prisca, I should let you go. You've been watching This Day Live, the Sunday talk show here on Arise News. I'm Reuben Abati in Nigeria's commercial capital, Lagos. From all of us here on Arise News, it's bye for now, and thank you very much for watching.